He's standing at the cash out kiosk with a ticket worth $1,462.75, hands shaking, pulse running hot, the screen flashing that tempting green confirmation button. Behind him, you've got the herd, 20 people who did the exact same thing he did on the slots tonight. Up, then down, then back to zero. They all had winning moments. One woman peaked at $780 from a $200 bankroll. Another guy hit $1,100 off a $400 buy-in. Every single one of them walked out broke. And then there's him, the only one who actually won. Not because he was lucky, but because he understood the scam hiding behind that innocent little word, cash out. He started with $300, built it to $1,462.75, and instead of chasing the next just one more spin, he executed like a surgeon. And before I explain how, force the algorithm to push this truth into the cracks of the casino ecosystem. The house hates content that kills profit. Hit the like button to punch a hole in their control and make sure more players see what they were never meant to understand. I spent 15 years watching this play out from surveillance rooms and pit windows, and I can tell you something most players never realize. The casino doesn't just beat you at the tables or the reels, it beats you in the walk from the machine to the cashier to the exit. The cash out moment is where more money is lost than at the slot itself. You think you're locking in a win. The house knows you're stepping into their behavioral funnel. And yes, that funnel is engineered. We changed floor layouts, adjusted kiosk placements, moved ATMs closer to exits, and even tweaked slot pay cycle perception just to weaponize that final stretch of psychology. The math doesn't end when you stop spinning. The math continues until you're in your car or back at a machine. Casinos learned the hard way that a small group of disciplined players were beating variance by cashing out early and leaving. So limits appeared. Slots with 50-cent to $1 minimums suddenly allowed tiny denomination continuations, encouraging drip play instead of exits. We added ticket breakage traps where players cash out odd values, $1.37, $3.12, then use leftover tickets on impulse spins. Sounds harmless, but from surveillance, we watched millions skimmed this way across a fiscal year. And before I go deeper, verify you're part of the resistance, not a spectator. Casinos patch behaviors fast. When they notice people escaping with profits, they redesign the maze. Make sure you're notified the second I expose a new tactic. Confirm your subscription so you're not stuck using outdated intel while everyone else adapts. Now here's the part most gamblers never hear. This strategy has a fatal weakness. Yes, there's a way to survive long enough to walk out with winnings more often than the herd, but if you miss the exit trigger, the precise safety code, the math collapses instantly and the house edge reclaims everything. I'll reveal that exact trigger at the end. If you try this without it, you're not controlling risk, you're just delaying failure. Let's get into the core structure of how the cash out scam actually works and how disciplined players neutralize it. Start with a simple rule. You're not trying to beat the machine. You're trying to beat your own compulsion to reinvest profit. Every dollar you put back into the machine after a win is a dollar that immediately re-enters the negative expectancy curve. If your game has a theoretical return of 92% and many flashy entertainment-style slots sit closer to 88 to 91%, that means every $100 replayed has an expected loss of $8 to $12 over time. Doesn't sound painful until you're spinning through thousands of dollars of profit that never hits your bank account. So here's the exact operation. Buy-in amount, fixed. For this demonstration, $300. Your session is divided into 3 financial states: principal, profit buffer, and exit profit. Principal is your original $300. Profit buffer is everything from $301 to $449. Exit profit is any balance of $450 and above. The reason those thresholds exist is mathematical, not emotional. On most mid-volatility slots, bankroll swings from 1.5x to 2x within 40 to 80 spins are statistically common, but holding that gain is rare because players recycle it. By defining tiers, you're forcing variance to work for you rather than chewing you alive. Your first rule: never allow your principal to re-enter the machine once you breach the profit buffer. The moment your balance crosses $450, you execute a partial cash out, not a full one, and this is where most people get confused. You remove your entire original bankroll and a small locked gain, and you continue with $87 on the machine. That $87 is now risk capital, mathematically disposable, not emotional bait. Players who follow bad strategies like Martingale hate this idea because it doesn't feel like pressing the advantage. Martingale tells you to double your losses until a win resets everything, but Martingale collapses under table limits and finite bankroll. Here, we're not doubling anything. We're amputating risk in controlled blocks. If I asked you to run a simple quiz here, I'd ask you this. If you start with $300, climb to $600, and cash out $400, leaving $200 in play, how much of your original bankroll is now truly at risk? The correct answer is 0, because your principal is already in your pocket. Every spin after that isn't recovery, it's exploration inside a controlled probability zone. Casinos hate this because the average player does the opposite. They climb to $600, tell themselves they're playing on winnings, and burn all the way back to 0. From surveillance, we used to track what we called re-entry collapse curves, the percentage of players who hit 1.5x balance and return to 0 within the next 90 spends. On volatile machines, that number exceeded 78%, not because the games were rigged, but because players couldn't detach from reinvestment behavior. And here's where the cash-out scam becomes visible. The kiosk is never the end of the session. The kiosk is placed inside a ring of high volatility attractors, bright cabinets, boosted sound profiles, jackpot drop animations. You cash out $400, your pocket feels heavy, and then you spot a machine that almost hit earlier. You tell yourself you'll just try $20. From our perspective upstairs, that was the beginning of the reclamation spiral. Your winnings weren't lost at the original machine. They were lost on the second impulse play. The discipline structure prevents that spiral by splitting assets. Ticket A is your secured capital, the one that goes in your wallet and does not re-enter circulation. Ticket B is your active bankroll. If ticket B hits another upswing, say from $87 up to $260, you repeat the process. You cash out again, securing another slice, leaving a small, calculated remainder. It's tedious, it's unglamorous, and that's why it works better than every flashy, secret pattern people chase. But remember what I said earlier, this system has a fatal weakness. There is a precise moment where continuing to play, even with a small remainder, becomes mathematically suicidal. That's the exit trigger, and without it, players convert a controlled win into a slow bleed. I'll reveal that trigger at the end, and you'll understand why I didn't give it to you up front. You need field intelligence on how aggressively your local floors are fighting discipline. Tell me the table limits, slot denominations, and whether your casinos are clustering kiosks near high volatility cabinets or in your exits. Drop your reports in the comments. We used to map player retention curves per region. If enough of you share data, we can reconstruct how far they're pushing the system around the world. Now, let's talk stop loss and stop win targets, because this is where players either survive or implode. Stop loss isn't the number where you quit forever, it's the number where the session mathematically ceases to make sense. For the $300 structure, the hard stop loss is $150 remaining with no profit buffers achieved after at least 120 spins. Why 120? Because on most mid-volatility slots, that's enough spin density to reveal whether the current cycle is permitting usable variance swings. If you never breach $375 during that window, the probability distribution you're inside is not favorable for buffer extraction. Continuing is just slow erosion. Stop win, on the other hand, is the point where buffer stacking reaches diminishing psychological returns. For this structure, it's typically between 2x and 2.5x your original buy-in in secured tickets. So if you've locked $600 to $750 into your wallet across multiple partial cash-outs, you've already beaten the statistical experience curve of the average player by a massive margin. Past that level, most players reverse discipline and donate everything back, trying to turn a good night into a life-changing one. Let's run a live session walkthrough so you can see the grind instead of imagining a miracle. Spin 1 through 20, the balance hovers between $300 and $330. Nothing dramatic, but that's normal. By spin 35, a small bonus bumps the balance to $378, still below the $450 buffer threshold, so no extraction yet. You keep playing with flat bet sizing, no emotional pressing, no impulse jumps. Spin 52, a medium hit takes the balance to $412. That's inside the buffer zone, but not yet in exit profit territory. The temptation here is to believe you're on a heater and start increasing bet size. That's how players break the math. You hold the line. By spin 67, a volatile cluster drops and you jump to $468. Now the rules activate. You started with $300. Total profit equals $168. You extract $375 into ticket A, principal plus a controlled slice, and continue with $93 in ticket B. Spin 70 through 85 is where most players would emotionally unravel. The $93 dips to $74, then $61. Instead of chasing, you remember what that money is. It's risk capital, not identity, not pride. Spin 92 bumps to $98. Spin 101 produces a bonus that lifts the balance to $182. Now comes the discipline test. Most gamblers would think, I'm building it back up. Let's see how high this goes. But our structure says anytime the remainder exceeds 1.5x relative to its last reset, prepare for extraction. You take $120 off, creating ticket C, leaving $62 in play. From the booth, this was the pattern almost no one followed. We'd see players hit 2 or 3 profitable cycles, then break discipline and reintroduce their entire wallet back into circulation. You're doing the opposite through drafting variance and discarding exposure. At this point in the session, you've got $375 and $120 secured, $495 total, against an original $300 stake. The average gambler at the same machine with the same outcomes would be down to $0 and telling himself the machine turned cold. Spin 115 through 140 sees the $62 remainder whipsaw between $40 and $78. There's no illusion of a magical pattern here. It's a grind, a mathematical walk through probability space. Spin 149 drops a minor bonus to $132. You extract again $90 to ticket D, $42 remaining. Across 149 spins, you've now secured $585 with $42 in active play. This is where bankroll management rules lock in. You never allow session length to exceed 5 times your spin density rule. If your plan is built around 120 spin evaluation blocks, your maximum exposure window is 600 spins. Beyond that, fatigue and house conditioning begin to erode discipline. Let's accelerate the session forward. Spin 160, the $42 remainder falls to $28. Spin 175, a tiny bump to $34. Spin 190, a neutral plateau. At spin 210, you're still under $50 with no substantive variance. This is not a signal to chase. This is the system telling you the current microcycle isn't offering the kind of gain you can safely harvest. The average player, bored and restless, increases bet size here to speed things up. From surveillance, that was one of the highest loss pivot points across the entire floor. Bankroll math forces patience. You're not asking whether you can win more. You're asking whether additional spins justify their expected loss relative to secured profit. With $585 pocketed, the risk-reward ratio of continuing is no longer symmetrical. One bad decision can cascade into a reclamation spiral, especially if you let your secured tickets re-enter play. This is the silent backbone of the strategy. Tickets in the wallet are not temptation. They are quarantine. Now let's stress test the structure with psychological friction, because this is where you'll feel the conflict most intensely. Imagine a player at the machine next to you hits a $2,000 jackpot. Your brain instantly reframes your disciplined $585 lock as small. That's herd conditioning at work. We saw it constantly. Players who were winning started feeling poor the moment someone else spiked a bigger hit. Instead of perceiving success, they perceived inadequacy and escalated risk. The house edge didn't move an inch, but their behavior did. The structure protects you against that reflex by forcing you to evaluate outcomes numerically, not emotionally. If your bankroll curve has transitioned from negative expectation exposure to secured profit reality, you've already won the only game that matters, exiting with more than you arrived with. Spin 230 through 260, the remainder dwindles, fluctuates, then stabilizes around $22. At this stage, many players fall into what we used to call the mercy spiral, chasing a symbolic final hit to end on a win. They don't want to walk away from a low remainder because it feels defeatist, but mathematically, that remainder has already served its purpose. It was a variance probe, not a trophy quest. Whether it dies at $0 or spikes to $90 again doesn't change the fact that your secured wallet has insulated your original bankroll and produced a net positive exit. By spin 280, the $22 burns out, session endpoint on the active ticket. Now here's where most people self-sabotage. They walk to the kiosk, cash the remaining tickets, see $585, and tell themselves there's still time to double it. They reintroduce ticket A, ticket C, ticket D, and the entire structure collapses in one emotional relapse. That's why this isn't about some magical winning machine. It's about insulating yourself from the single most destructive force on the casino floor, re-entry. And we're approaching the part I warned you about, the fatal weakness buried inside this entire system. There is one moment where even disciplined players talk themselves into continuing when every piece of math is screening to leave. That moment is tied to a very specific ratio between secured tickets and recent remainder volatility. Miss that ratio and the house doesn't need to trick you anymore. You'll voluntarily melt your profit back into the floor. I'll give you the exact exit trigger after this because you needed to see how the session breathes, how it rises, stalls, and closes before you can understand why the trigger exists at all. Here's the brutal truth that most gamblers never want to confront. You can out-discipline the herd, you can segment bankroll layers, and you can secure profit pieces like a surgeon, but you cannot outrun the house edge forever. The longer you stay, the more spins you take, the deeper you slide back toward mathematical gravity. What you're doing with this structure isn't beating the casino, you're reducing exposure time inside a losing environment so you can escape with your skin still on. That's why the system only works when you respect the one thing every losing player ignores. The end of the session is not when you feel done, it's when the numbers say you're done. Remember the ratio I warned you about? The one that turns disciplined play into silent self-sabotage? We used to track this from the surveillance booth, and I can't count how many nights I watched strong players crumble at this exact point. You've secured between 2x and 2.5x your buy-in across multiple tickets. In the earlier example, around $585 to $750 against a $300 start. Your last remainder ticket goes dead or stalls in a low band that refuses to climb. Emotion tells you you're due for one more upswing. The casino knows that's where most players re-enter. The fatal weakness shows up when your secured profit is greater than 1.8x your original bankroll, but your last two remainder cycles have failed to breach a 1.4x expansion from their reset. Translated to numbers, your secured wallet is already stacked, say $585, but your lost remainder ticket climbed from $62 to only $88 before decaying, and the next climbed from $42 to only $63 before flatlining. Two consecutive weak variance bands, both topping out under roughly 1.4x. That's not bad luck. That's a shift in volatility posture on the machine, and statistically, that pattern correlates with extended erosion windows. The disciplined player reads that as a red alert. The undisciplined player calls it almost hitting and keeps going. This is the exit trigger, the safety code that separates controlled extraction from the reclamation spiral. The rule is absolute. When you've secured at least 1.8x your original bankroll in tickets, and you observe two consecutive remainder cycles that fail to breach 1.4x from reset within 90 to 120 spins each, the session is over. No exceptions, no curiosity, no last shot bets. You do not reload. You do not bring a secured ticket back into circulation. You do not switch to a more exciting machine on the way out. The probability surface has shifted out of harvest range and into attrition range. Every additional spin after that point is no longer exploration, it's surrender. And I know exactly how the mind tries to negotiate around that. You tell yourself you're only risking a small piece because you're ahead. You convince yourself that a few more spins might push the total to a clean number, $600, $700, $1,000. But that's the psychological chokeholds that keeps casinos alive. The house doesn't need to stop you from winning. It just needs to convince you that one more round is harmless. From the booth, we used to watch players walk out with life-changing relief in their eyes, $500, $900, $1,200 ahead, then turn around, sit down for a victory lap, and burn every ticket they'd just secured. Not because the machines hunted them, but because they couldn't tolerate the feeling of leaving with unfinished potential. Bankroll management is not about potential, it's about preservation. Your edge, the only edge a civilian player will ever truly have, is the ability to stop playing. The casino can control lights, sounds, layout, pacing, alcohol flow, volatility cycles, and attention funnels, but it cannot reach inside your pocket and force those tickets back into a machine. That decision has always been yours, and for most people, it's the one choice they fail to make. So here's the final payoff, the code I promised from the beginning and the reason I waited until now. Without understanding the grind, the extraction cycles, the probability bands, and the psychological traps layered into the cash-out corridor, this trigger would sound like superstition. It isn't. It's math, fatigue modeling, and behavioral collapse prevention. The exit trigger is this: when your secured profit exceeds 1.8x your buy-in and your last two remainder cycles peak below 1.4x before decaying across roughly 90 to 120 spins each, you leave immediately. Even if your last ticket feels unfinished, even if the machine looks like it's warming up, even if someone else sits down after you and gets a bonus, your job is not to harvest every possible win. Your job is to make sure the casino doesn't harvest you. And if you're wondering why I'm so relentless about discipline, it's because I've seen what happens when good players refuse to use it. I've watched veterans with perfect mechanical structures lose everything because they couldn't walk past a glowing cabinet on the way to the exit. I've watched gamblers who were ahead by more than a week's wages turn around and hand it back in under 20 minutes. Not because they were unlucky, but because they stayed after the math had already told them to go. The herd will always chase one more hit, one more spin, one more rush, and the house will keep building floors designed to catch them on that final walk to the door. You don't have to join them. You don't have to be part of the 99% who leave empty-handed after standing inches from safety. Lock your principal early, segment your profit, respect the spin density limits, treat your tickets like quarantine, not ammunition, and when the exit trigger fires, don't negotiate with it, obey it. That's how you survive in a place designed to make you forget you ever intended to leave. Stay sharp, stay disciplined, and never forget, the only real power you have in a casino is the decision to walk away while you're still winning.